Hello again, welcome back to the Daily Climate Show here on Sky News, and we're getting straight to discussing the climate issues of the day with the climate activist and environmental scientist Laura Young and Michael Jacobs, Professor of Political Economy at Sheffield University. Now, news that deforestation is at record levels in the Brazilian Amazon will come as no surprise, of course, to environmentalists in that country. The administration of Jair Bolsonaro has been widely criticised for allowing and even encouraging illegal logging. But Brazil signed a pledge in Glasgow to stop deforestation by 2030. So how can he be held to his promise, and how can leaders more widely be held accountable to their promises on climate action? Let's find out what our guests think. Michael, starting with you, why don't we just have a look at that pledge that leaders made at COP on deforestation? We can bring it to you now. This is what they said. We commit to working collectively to halt and reverse forest loss and land degradation by 2030. But how on earth do we get leaders of places like Brazil to stick to those pledges?
Well, of course, we don't, if by we you mean people in every other country other than Brazil. Brazilians hate it, including Brazilian environmentalists, when the rest of the world talks about our rainforest. They say, no, this is our rainforest. It's in Brazil. It's also in several other countries in Latin America. And the only way that Bolsonaro, the president of Brazil, who has shown absolutely no interest in stopping deforestation, although he signed that statement, the only way to get him to do so is Brazilian political pressure from within the country. There is quite a big environmental movement in Brazil. And of course, they have an election next year, and the principal opposition candidate, the former president Lula, has said that he will run on a platform of stopping or slowing down deforestation, eventually stopping it. So this is all about Brazilian politics. What's interesting, of course, is that he did sign that statement, President Bolsonaro. And if international agreements were really useless, he wouldn't have bothered doing so. So he clearly feels some pressure from outside, and that is the pressure that international agreements like the one that was achieved in Glasgow can achieve. They can put some pressure on, but really accountability is ultimately what politicians get from their own domestic constituencies. Yeah,
we'll get Laura's thoughts on this very shortly. But quickly, Michael, what about sanctions, international sanctions? Could they not work?
It's very unlikely with the current state of international politics that sanctions would be applied. We tried that before, actually, when in the first international climate agreement, the Kyoto Protocol, signed in 1997, there was a sanctions regime for countries that didn't meet their targets. They were going to be required to have stronger targets next time round. But it didn't work. Countries that didn't meet their targets, like Canada, just withdrew from the Kyoto Protocol, and so it no longer applied to them. So when it came to the Paris Climate Agreement in 2015, that regime of sanctions was abandoned. So now all we have is peer pressure, the pressure that being part of the international community and signing an agreement has on every country. And you might think that's very weak, and at one level it is. But at another level, the Paris Climate Agreement told countries to come back 5 years later with stronger commitments, and they all did so, including Brazil. Okay. So it does have some impact, even though there is no legal sanction.
Yeah, well, those figures, Laura, are really distressing today, aren't they? Deforestation in Brazil up 22% since last year, its highest level since 2006. Let's have a look at what Greenpeace had to say today. We can show you that if anyone believed Bolsonaro's government's empty promises at COP, the truth is in those numbers. What about people power, Laura? That's what I want to talk to you about, because you're a climate activist. How important is that in making a difference, making leaders accountable?
So important. It's one of the really important things we can do as individuals, to talk to our local government representatives. For me, up here in Glasgow, that's my MSP, my MP, all the way up, and to really try and push from the bottom. I loved that analogy of kind of peer pressure from around the world as well, because although the Amazon is vital, it's the lungs of the earth, and we all need to be doing a bit to protecting it, we can set a global standard for forestry, and that's something that we can look at here within the UK as well. We can ask our elected leaders, how are we leading the way with deforestation, bringing that back, and also afforestation, putting more forests in, and that's something we can talk to our local representatives about to push the change, to hopefully make our leaders of the UK influence global leaders as well.
Other people that can influence, of course, are celebrities, high-profile figures. Laura, I know you were up in Glasgow. I don't know if you got a chance to meet Leonardo DiCaprio when you were there. Do you welcome people like him, those sort of people with huge star power coming in and getting involved in climate action?
I think it's great. The more the merrier who are inside the climate movement. You know, any person can be a climate activist, and we need people from all walks of life to do climate activism in their own way. There was a lot of fuss around some celebrities coming to COP26, and I guess in one breath, I would say that it did take some airtime away from really important voices who weren't necessarily represented at this COP, young people, Indigenous people, people from marginalised communities. And so I think there's definitely a role for celebrities to play in the climate movement. It might not just necessarily be front and centre taking up time at these conferences, but I would encourage more celebrities to get on board and to talk about this, but also to really walk the walk when it comes to climate action. I think one of the biggest criticisms for celebrities jumping on board is the hypocrisy, and it's about how we can encourage them to do better individually, but also use their sphere of influence to encourage business and government to come along with us as well.
Yeah, good point. We've been following Prince Charles in Egypt over the last few days, Michael. British royals obviously traditionally don't get involved in politics, but are the rules different when it comes to climate change, do you think?
Well, yes and no. So Prince Charles has been very active on environmental issues in general and climate change in particular for quite a few years. And by and large, he's not had the kinds of criticism for doing that he has in some of the other areas where he's intervened, like architecture and planning, where he's been more criticised. And that is because, in general, environmental concern is cross-party. I think as somebody who works in a politics department, I know that many people who work on constitutional matters are concerned about this. Yes, climate change and environment is a generally popular clause, but in principle, when you have a hereditary monarch, or in this case, the heir to the monarch, the point is that they don't get involved in politics. And, you know, one of the things we always say about the Queen is how remarkable it is that she's been on the throne for all this time, and we really don't know what her political views are because she has kept them to herself. And the fact that we have a new, the heir to the throne, who will presumably be monarch fairly soon, whom we know his views about many issues, of which this is just one, I think worries a lot of people who study the constitutional question. But on climate, he's been a force of good. I don't think he's the greatest influencer on TikTok, but he has been important in convening business leaders, political leaders and others to discuss this. And so in that sense, he has played a positive role.
Yeah, and he said he won't be a meddling monarch, so he may tone things down a bit when he finally becomes king. And just 10 seconds, Laura, really. Do you think Prince William, do you think young people listen to him when he talks about green issues?
More so than other people, so that's a good thing.
All right, great. Really good speaking to you both. Thank you very much indeed. Michael Jacobs, Laura Young, always good to talk to you. Have a good weekend. And don't forget, you can download and listen to ClimateCast wherever you get your podcasts from. This week, Ashton Hurinag gets two very different views on the Glasgow Climate Agreement from George Monbiot and Seppi Golzari-Monroe. And that is everything from us for today. But do stay tuned, because coming up next, 18-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty on all counts and acquitted for the shooting of 3 men. That's the latest in a couple of minutes.